Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Cowling, and I'm coming to you today from Australia, specifically from Melbourne in Australia. And if you're seeing this video, it's for one of two reasons. Number one is that I wasn't able to be dialed in live to the AECT panel at the AECT conference, for which I'm really, really sad. Well, number two, hopefully it's because you're watching this video on YouTube, where I intend to upload it for people to have a look at after the AECT panel happens. But either way, the idea of this presentation is to give you an opportunity to hear a little bit from me about how AI has impacted Australia specifically, and talk a little bit about generative AI and those changes that have happened with generative AI over the last few years. And hopefully, I'll be able to do that live. But if not, you've got the opportunity to watch this recording. And so I'm going to hit share on my screen and share a couple of slides with you just to give you a sense of things. So hopefully everybody can see that in recording land. And yeah, indeed, this presentation is for a panel, which is called Global Perspectives on AI Integration, Redefining Educational Technology for the Future for, as I mentioned, the AECT conference in 2025. And what I've been asked to talk about specifically is advancements and current practices of AI integration in education, specifically here in Australia. And as you can see from my background, I'm actually a professor at RMIT here in Australia in Melbourne. But I've been talking about generative AI for the last couple of years because generative AI is my PhD, and I'm an educational technologist. That's the area that I work in. So when generative AI came along, it just sort of seemed like something I should probably talk about. So, one of the first things I often show when I talk about generative AI is this mapping here. And this is mapping is against a thing called the Gartner Hype Cycle. And the Gartner Hype Cycle is used to measure anything that happens in technology and really sort of think about how that technology might be used and how it might change over time. And I love the Gartner Hype Cycle because it really maps well for ChatGPT. And we all know that ChatGPT and generative AI really hit us in November 2022. And then according to Gartner, we then traveled through this graph of inflated expectations through to a trough of disillusionment, through to a slope of enlightenment, and finally to this plateau of productivity. And I actually showed this graph about 12 months ago at a symposium that I was at, which I'll share the video link for you at the end of this recording. But the idea is that I think we've kind of gotten past a lot of these stages, and we really are at this stage on this slope of enlightenment, working our way towards the plateau of productivity. And if you think back to ChatGPT and how it happened, I think you can understand why I'm saying that, because there was definitely at the beginning this peak of inflated expectations. It would change the world, it would change everything, followed by this trough of disillusionment where we all realized that it hallucinated and couldn't be trusted. And I think now finally we're getting towards some good models for understanding how to use it effectively, and where it's good, it can be used well, and where it might not be good to use it. That doesn't mean that there aren't still problems with this. And here in Australia, we've been grappling with all of these things, and I suspect this is true across the world. Things like it undermining assessment strategies, it being an issue for plagiarism and academic integrity. Of course, the misinformation, which I talked about just before, hallucinations, it not telling the truth, and then us really worrying about how it's going to impact our learning. And that's really based on the way that we've built learning in the past and how ChatGPT can kind of undermine some of that. And in the early days, it led to us asking questions like, should ChatGPT be regulated? Should higher education think about, banning generative AI and ChatGPT? And should we try and train students to use these tools? And if you look back over my history, you'll see these are the things I talked about in 23 and 24, and was involved in a lot of conversations in Australia about this stuff. We've started to, I think, come out of the other end of that. And here in Australia now, we've started to come up with some models for thinking about how we might use generative AI in education in our classroom. And I think the first one I really need to highlight for you is first and foremost, I want to mention that one of the authors, the preeminent authors that does a lot of this work is Jason Lodge. Here in Australia, he's at the University of Queensland, and this is one of his publications exploring some of those ideas from November 2023. But I'll come back to Jason because he kept on talking about this. But really, the first model I want to mention is this one here from the University of Sydney, and it's this two-lane approach pioneered by a guy called Professor Danny Liu. And it really basically says that when it comes down to it, we either have a lane where we're sort of blocking students' ability to use these generative AI tools, or we have a lane where we say to students, you can use them for whatever you want. And really, there's nothing in between. Right, so he calls lane one assignments the assignments that are for assessment of learning. They're basic skills and knowledge that our programs require. And Danny's suggestion is that if you want to stop people using generative AI for these, they probably need to be invigilated. Lane two assessments are things where your students can engage responsibly with AI. We need to teach them what the tool's good at and what it's not good at, but we can't limit what they use it for because they're uninvigilated. And so they become lane two assessments. And Uni Sydney in particular says that most of our assessments should be lane two assessments, except for those things that really are assessing learning the mastery of those skills and knowledge that our programs require. They're a really popular model here in Australia, used by lots of institutions, very widely understood and accepted. Something that's a little bit newer is this model by my PhD student, Josiah. I thought this was a really useful model because it is a spectrum of what AI is good at and what it's not so good at. He calls it the AITTTS, the AI Teacher Teaching Task Spectrum. And the basic idea is that AI is good at some things like procedural and knowledge tasks, not so good at other things like inspiration or pastoral care. We need to understand what it's good at and what it's not so good at and work AI into our classroom in the places where it's better and work our teachers into our classroom in the places where they're better. And Josiah has since published on various other things in this model, but this publication was actually at ASCOLITE, which is a conference on technology enhanced learning here in Australia, in 2022. Something that I'll lay claim to that isn't actually an Australian model because Mike Perkins is actually in Vietnam, but we'll lay claim to it because it was published in an Australian journal, which is the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice, is this model, the AI assessment scale. This is by Perkins and Furs and various other people, but really it's Mike and Leon that kind of lead this. And it basically maps out a traffic light sort of system, mapping out an AI assessment scale all the way from no AI all the way through to full AI here. And what I like Mike's and Leon's model for is not so much the regulation, because again, as per Danny, you probably can't regulate. But instead, I love this model for the tips that it gives you on what AI is good at and what it's not so good at. So AI is great at idea generation and structuring. It's great at editing. It's great at sort of completing a task for you based on bullet points. It's sometimes good at being a co-pilot, but there are things that it's not good at, right? And and you'll notice things missing from this table, and those are the things that the human being should do. Again, Leon and Mike and their colleagues have I think Jay is Jasper. They've iterated on this model a bit since then. If you Google the AI assessment scale, you'll find a new version of this model. This is version 1 from early days. There's now a version 2, and they've since published a little bit more on this, including, I think, another paper for an Australian journal, the Australian Journal of Educational Technology, and I think another paper for the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice as well. So I'm going to lay claim to it, even though Mike's in Vietnam. This is another model. I told you we'd get back to Jason Lodge. This is Jason's model for generative AI in schools. This is a K-12 model, but Jason, I think, did a really good job at breaking down a whole bunch of stuff related to generative AI. And what it's useful for, including teaching and learning, which you've sort of seen me talk about a little bit already. But as well as that, a whole bunch of other things we need to think about in terms of privacy, transparency, fairness, human and social well-being, all of that kind of stuff. It's K to 12, but I think super useful for higher education. He's now done this kind of thing for higher education as well in a newer publication in September 2025, so hot off the press as of last month, called Enacting Assessment Reform in a Time of Artificial Intelligence. He's put some meat on the bones of this idea. So the link down the bottom here is a link to the article with the Department of Education here in Australia, which is the K-12 sector. But if you Google TEQSA and Jason Lodge, you'll be able to find this article as well. And in fact, that's where I'm going to leave us talking about things, mentioning that TEQSA here in Australia is really the place that has led a lot of this stuff. And it's really useful that our national regulator, because TEQSA is the Australian Government Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, actually has a Gen AI Knowledge Hub. And not only do they have this hub with a whole bunch of links to stuff done at places like Askellite, which I mentioned before, the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice, by the editors of the Juddle Journal, like Joey Crawford, for example, as well as stuff by Danny Liu and stuff by Jason Lodge as well. But also just sort of commission things as well. So a lot of those articles that Jason's published have been published by TEQSA, because TEQSA thinks this is something important that we need to attack. And so I think that's probably where I'm going to leave it. There is in here a couple of other things that I wanted to show you, a couple of other examples. I'm going to stop on them briefly just to give you a chance to look at them, hopefully. And then, and this one here, which is Cogniti, which is a tool developed by Danny for educators. And then last but not least, I'm going to point you towards this video. So if you want more than 8 minutes from me talking about generative AI, I'm really proud of this presentation that I did this around about this time last year at the University of New South Wales Higher Education Summit, where we talk a little bit more about, or I talk and various other people talk about the impact of generative AI on higher education. You can follow this link here to get directly to it, or if you Google UNSW Higher Education Summit 2024, you'll find the whole video, including me, including a colleague of mine, Tim Fawns, and also including Danny Liu, Kelly Matthews, various other people in a panel discussion as well. So I think that's probably where I'm going to leave it. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. Hopefully I will see you live, but if not, you've all had a chance to see this video. And if you have any questions, please do send me an email. If you Google Michael Cowling at RMIT, you'll be able to find my email address. It's just michael.cowling@rmit.edu.au. Happy to have a conversation with you about Gen AI, and enjoy the conference, ladies and gentlemen.